On October 24th, Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell announced the following. In support of the President's directive to dismantle transnational criminal organizations and counter narco-terrorism in defense of the homeland, the Secretary of War has directed the Gerald R Ford Carrier Strike Group and Embarked Carrier Air Wing to the U.S. Southern Command area of responsibility. The enhanced U.S. force presence in the U.S. Southcom AOR will bolster U.S. capacity to detect, monitor, and disrupt illicit actors and activities that compromise the safety and prosperity of the United States homeland and our security in the Western Hemisphere. These forces will enhance and augment existing capabilities to disrupt narcotics trafficking and degrade and dismantle TCOs. Ford embarked on its current deployment at the end of June, and since that time, the carrier and escort destroyers have split time between the Mediterranean Sea and North Sea, highlighted by participation in NATO's Neptune strike exercise and port calls to Oslo, Norway, Majorca, Spain, and Split, Croatia. As we've documented over a number of episodes, including one recorded on the bridge, Ford is the first aircraft carrier in the U.S. Navy's newest class that features 27 new technologies that make it a generational improvement over the Nimitz-class carriers it's designed to replace. Those technologies include 3 in particular: the Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System, or EMALS catapults that use electronic impulse instead of steam to launch aircraft off the flight deck, the Advanced Arresting Gear, and electronic weapons elevators that have had significant developmental challenges that delayed Ford's introduction to the fleet. Those challenges have continued on the current deployment. Specifically, the carrier's transit across the Atlantic after pulling out of Norfolk in June was delayed for more than a week as engineers worked to replace the engines that power the Advanced Arresting Gear. But those issues notwithstanding, Ford is the largest and most powerful warship in the world. The attached carrier air wing, CAG-8, includes 3 single-seat Super Hornet squadrons, 1 two-seat Super Hornet squadron, a Hawkeye Advanced Early Warning Squadron, an Electronic Attack Growler Squadron, 2 Seahawk helicopter squadrons, and a Greyhound Carrier Onboard Delivery Squadron. Notably, Ford is not currently configured to operate for extended periods with F-35C 5th-generation fighters, but those are already in the Caribbean aboard the USS Iwo Jima, an amphibious assault ship. The rest of the Ford Carrier Strike Group includes 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and at least 1 attack submarine. It's not clear if all of those ships are also headed to the Caribbean. Reporting on current events like the drug war in the Caribbean is challenging because the situation is very fluid and chaotic at times. So let me tell you about a resource that I depend on as I attempt to provide an unbiased point of view: Ground News. Let's go to the Ground News homepage and type something general associated with the topic of this episode, like Venezuela, into the search box. In the dropdown, we see U.S. warship docks in Trinidad and Tobago puts more pressure on Venezuela. Clicking on that gets us to this landing page that features a bulletized summary of the topic curated using Ground News' proprietary Ground AI insights. Over on the right, we see that there are 232 articles on the topic, and down here we see an infographic with the bias distribution. Let's compare 2 headlines. First one is from Malay Mail, owned by an individual with high factuality and leans right. We click on the headline and it drives us right to the article. Once we're done reading, we can click right back to compare it with another one with the opposite bias, in this case, Indian Express, owned by a private equity firm with high factuality and leans left. Again, it's easy to click on the article to read it and then click back to Ground News once you're done. You can't get this amount of information organized like this anywhere else. Go to ground.news/Ward or scan the QR code on the screen. If you use my link, you can get 40% off unlimited access, which is the Vantage plan that I use. Again, that's ground.news/Ward or scan the QR code. The link is in the episode description below, so check it out. At the time of the announcement, Ford was conducting a port call in Split. About 48 hours later, the carrier raised anchor and started the transit out of the Med and back across the Atlantic, a trip that will take about a week or so. Once Ford reaches the Caribbean, it will join the recently formed Joint Task Force already in place. That task force currently includes 8 U.S. Navy warships led by the USS Iwo Jima, an amphibious assault ship with an embarked air combat element, with the aforementioned Marine Corps F-35B stealth fighters, in addition to attack helicopters and V-22 Ospreys to transport troops ashore if required. There are also U.S. Navy P-8 patrol planes operating out of Puerto Rico. Once Ford arrives, it will most likely take over as the lead ship in the task force, which is headed by Marine Corps Lieutenant General Calvert Worth, a career infantry officer. Since September, weeks before the Joint Task Force was formed, the U.S. military has been conducting strikes on open boats claimed by the Trump administration to be operated by narco-terrorists carrying drugs. Secretary Hegseth just announced the latest strike in a tweet that reads, "Overnight, at the direction of President Trump, the Department of War carried out a lethal kinetic strike on a vessel operated by Tren de Aragua, a designated terrorist organization trafficking narcotics in the Caribbean Sea. The vessel was known by our intelligence to be involved in illicit narcotic smuggling, was transiting along a known narco-trafficking route, and carrying narcotics. 6 male narco-terrorists were aboard the vessel during the strike, which was conducted in international waters and was the first strike at night. All 6 terrorists were killed and no U.S. forces were harmed in this strike. If you are a narco-terrorist smuggling drugs in our hemisphere, we will treat you like we treat Al-Qaeda. Day or night, we will map your networks, track your people, hunt you down, and kill you." And below that tweet is the FLIR footage of the strike. In addition to the strikes on suspected drug traffickers in small boats at sea, U.S. Air Force strategic bombers have also reportedly made multiple simulated attack runs on the coast of Venezuela in recent weeks. The latest strike is the 10th publicly announced in the U.S. Southern Command area of responsibility since September that have killed at least 43 people. The majority of those strikes have been in the Caribbean Sea, but the U.S. also struck 2 vessels in the Pacific. One of those strikes left 2 survivors who were repatriated to Colombia and Ecuador. The Trump administration has given little legal justification for the strikes, which the president first disclosed in early September at a news conference at the White House. The administration describes the strikes as military self-defense operations under U.S. Title X. Both Democrats and Republicans in Congress have questioned the legality of the strikes under U.S. and international law. Secretary Hegseth's tweet about the most recent boat strike mentions Tren de Aragua as the organization that was operating the vessel. Tren de Aragua started as a gang formed in a Venezuelan prison that branched out internationally after Maduro came to power and the Venezuelan economy melted down. The gang is involved in drug smuggling, extortion, and prostitution, and is suspected in the shooting of 2 New York police officers and the killing of a former Venezuelan police officer in Florida. Colombian President Gustavo Petro has criticized the Trump administration over the boat strikes, saying that in some cases, the deceased are Colombian fishermen, which makes Trump guilty of murder. In response, President Trump posted on social media that Petro is an illegal drug leader who accepts large-scale payments and subsidies from the USA that are nothing more than a long-term rip-off of America, and that those payments will no longer be made to Colombia. He also calls Petro low-rated and very unpopular, with a fresh mouth towards America, and threatens that he'd better close up the killing fields immediately, or the United States will close them up for him, and it won't be done nicely. President Trump has been equally critical of Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro, whose government is basically a crime syndicate that has created gangs like Tren de Aragua and driven his once thriving country into poverty and chaos, despite the fact it sits on the highest oil resources in the world. So what's the end game behind massing the Ford carrier strike group along with the rest of the Joint Task Force in the Caribbean? The answer to that depends on the interpretation of the words disrupt, degrade, and dismantle that Pentagon spokesman Parnell uses a couple of times in his announcement of Ford's movement from the Med to the Caribbean. Once Ford gets on station, will we just continue taking out small boats, or will we conduct airstrikes into Venezuela and Colombia, as the United States has done in Yemen, Iran, and elsewhere in the Middle East in recent months? And would those strikes be executed to surgically take out the drug manufacturing industry controlled by Tren de Aragua and other cartels, or to effect regime change from socialist dictatorships towards fledgling democracies that could thrive by selling vast energy resources on the world market? It's worth noting that despite a U.S. embargo of military equipment since 2006, the Russians have continued to supply Venezuela with arms, including fourth-generation fighters like the Su-30. The Venezuelan military has more than 300,000 personnel, including a paramilitary force created to counter domestic uprisings funded by an annual defense budget of around $750 million, which is a small fraction of what the United States spends on defense. It's doubtful that military would be able to mount much of a defense in the event the Caribbean Joint Task Force elected to conduct airstrikes, but putting American boots on the ground might be a different matter considering Venezuela's mountainous terrain and dense jungles. Regardless of military options, President Trump recently stated his bottom-line goal when questioned by a reporter in the Oval Office why he doesn't ask Congress for a declaration of war.
Mr. President, if you are declaring war against these cartels and Congress is likely to approve of that process, why not just ask for a declaration of war?
Well, I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country. Okay? We're going to kill them. You know, they're going to be like dead.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. If you're not already a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything going forward. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.